Welcome to the Hedgeneer Podcast with your hosts, Michael Watson and Jhanvi.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Hedgeneer Podcast. I'm your co-host, Michael Watson.
And I'm your other co-host, Jhanvi.
And today we're going to be talking about sell-side broker research and AI. But before we do, Jhanvi, it's been another eye-popping week within the AI space. What's new?
I think there's a ton of things that have made headlines. Obviously, Anthropic filed for their IPO, which is huge. DeepSeek raised a new round. But I think the thing that is causing a lot more buzz in our office and disproportionately to the buzz that it's making in the market is this new plugin marketplace availability within Claude.ai. And so I'd love to kind of chat about that a little bit more. But before we do, give us a little bit more context on like what a plugin marketplace actually is and like what is this new thing that came out? Because I feel like no one's talking about it. And part of the reason for that is that no one really fully understands it.
Yeah. So Anthropic has a concept of a plugin marketplace, which I think that marketplace is one way to name it when you think about it as a way for people to distribute skills and hooks and connectors and agents from like, I sell you agents. But it's really just a way to be able to manage and distribute context within or across organizations at scale in a very structured way. And they've integrated it into Cowork. They've integrated it into Claude Code. But up until Monday, if you had a set of skills that you structure within a GitHub repo and you wanted to push them to everyone in your company via a plugin, you could do that for people that were using Claude Code. You could do that for people that were using Cowork. But for the people that were just using chat, whether it's Claude.ai via web or chat or Claude chat via desktop, the only way that they could use skills is if they manually uploaded them in the portal, or you created them in your local session and said, save this as a skill. And it was very unscalable. There was no way for an organization to be able to look at like, all right, what are all the skills we have across the company? How do we permission just skills associated to fundamental equity research or for private credit deal room evaluation or for end of day cash settlement? Like, let's say those are actual names of skills and you want to distribute them to everyone in the company. If people were just using Claude Chat, you couldn't do that. It was locked down. And so when we're building out large skill libraries for our clients, is something that we just systematically do for everyone. There was always this caveat up until Monday of this week that, oh, by the way, like all these amazing skills that our team and the AI that we're running within your cloud are auto-generating, they actually aren't available within chats or the Claude.ai. It's like, wait, what? For some of our clients, it's the first thing that they deploy because they're afraid of the security profiles of Cowork and Code. And so we had to manually copy and upload. It was super messy.
Like I think just as not to stop you, but
yeah,
I think just reaffirming and underwriting, like the simplest way to think about a plugin marketplace is it's a folder. It is a folder where you can put in skills, you can put in agents, you can put in hooks, and then you can share them with multiple people, either specific teams or your entire company in a very easy way, right?
Yeah.
Like it's usually just a GitHub repository. Anytime you make a change to a skill, it automatically changes for everyone in their Cowork. Anytime you change an agent, it automatically changes for everyone. And it just changed everywhere except Claude.ai.
Yes.
Until very recently.
Until recently. And so for us, it's awesome. Like how we approach skill libraries is we'll have a skill library or we'll have a plugin for each user. So Jhanvi has her own set of plugins. Michael has his own set of plugins. Michael and Jhanvi might be on the accounting team. And so then there's shared accounting plugins that all of us get. And then there's organizational plugins that everyone in the company gets. And now by being able to have that, as you described it very simply, shared folder, but permissioned based off of what groups that we're in, we can have one location where all of these skills, agents, hooks, and MCP connectors are defined and stored and sync that across the enterprise in one place, regardless of what Claude tool you're using. And that was awesome. Because one of the other elements that we often get asked is, do you guys only work with Claude? And are you afraid of vendor lock-in? And My response has always been like, no, absolutely not. We work with Cursor. We work with ChatGPT Enterprise. We work with Claude. But our job as being a steward of AI for our clients is to make sure that we're always using the best tools, the best AI, the best systems for the job. And up until now, or at least the recent history has been, Claude has been the best ecosystem for our client base. And that's why we use it. But understanding how we operate is an important element of understanding that we actually enable vendor, from an AI perspective, agnosticism, essentially more than anyone else, because we focus on like how do we improve the quality of context? How do we improve the outcomes of Claude or ChatGPT or Cursor? And we primarily do that through understanding the agentic loop when an agent's determining what tools to call, what skills to pull in, what memories to pull in, what knowledge to inject in order to achieve the task that the user or an agent has given them via an initial prompt. And so understanding that loop and building in solutions for that are language model agnostic allows us to be able to modify that loop for Claude, ChatGPT, Cursor by having, in this case, a skill library that is permissioned across the organization, structured for individuals and teams, and then made available to everywhere that you use Claude. You can already do that with Cursor, and you can do that with ChatGPT. So if you have this one place where you manage best practices and workflows and skills for the enterprise, and you have the ability to then inject this context into any of the agentic loops, whether it's running in ChatGPT or Claude or within Cursor, that you now own that context. And if you want to go from one to the other, it's irrelevant. And you do the same thing with MCP. Like an MCP server is not inherently locked into any model provider. It's inherently agnostic. It's an open standard. So if you have an MCP server or you have an MCP gateway in front of an MCP server, that inherently allows you to use any of the best-in-class language model providers or put a proxy in front of them and arbitrate across them with zero switching costs. And the last part is like how you think about memories and knowledge, and you train your users so that the tokens that they're injecting in are constantly getting better. They're getting advice from AI on how they can prove how they're using AI based off of the last component, which is observability. So regardless whether you're using ChatGPT or Claude or Cursor, all of your user prompts, the system response, the tool calls, the skills flow into a data model completely agnostic to Claude. And so they all have OTel integration. We have a single OTel collector. All of these different platforms within our clients' environments flow into one data model. The data never leaves their environment. And so if they were to have everyone switch tomorrow to ChatGPT and turn off Claude, all of that data history that you get from everything your organization is doing is still completely linear, and you have all of that history. If you go back to Claude, you go onto Cursor, you switch everything to Cursor, you go to Wabu Tibu, whatever the next great language model is going to be, you have that continuity of history in a data model that can allow you to constantly be learning about how you can be using AI better in an agnostic way. You take the skill library and you remount it onto the new agentic loop that's the new hot item of the day. Great. Now you have that same context available within that loop. You take that MCP gateway and all those MCP servers that you've worked on curating, and you print the language model with Wamu Timu at this new set of data, and it just continues to work. And you make sure that your world-class workforce that you've been training based off of learning how you can get better with all of this AI switches from Claude to this new data provider, and you were actually enabling model agnosticism in a way that is more powerful than anything that I'm aware of, but we're also not doing that through having to own the last mile. Like a lot of people assume that in order to get model agnosticism, you have to be the one that builds the chatbot. That's wrong. That's a misunderstanding and not appreciating what's happening in the agentic loop. What you have to do is you have to own the context window in which that context is being generated within the agentic loop. And then you don't care where the chat happens. Like if you want to take that skill library, those MCPs, a memory store, and make that accessible to an agentic loop in your chatbot that you're building yourself, sure, go ahead. You can own that last mile. But being model agnostic has nothing to do with owning the chat interface that allows you to be able to toggle on and off which model you're using. Because what you're actually doing is you're not model agnostic, but now you are your chat lock-in. And the last thing you want is a lock-in to proprietary technology that is legacy before it's even released. And so we've seen a lot of clients that are building out their own chatbots with the justification that it's enabling model agnosticism. But what it's actually doing is creating legacy code lock-in that an organization is building a lot of their workflows on that honestly is already falling behind the capabilities you get from model provider capabilities when you use their last mile tools like a Cowork. And so it is fair to be able to question whether or not the decisions you're making are forcing you into a certain model or frontier model provider as a lock-in. I agree with that, but actually understanding how the entire supply chain of tokens, the agentic loop, how you manage context with MCPs, with skills, with user involvement via prompting, memory stores, knowledge bases, unless you understand how that works fundamentally, you're not in a position to be able to prevent lock-in, because you might force yourself into a technology platform that causes lock-in, which is going to be more detrimental than choosing a frontier model provider platform that might provide you a little bit of lock-in if you don't know what's going on, but at least you're getting a great system out of that. The last thing that you want is try to prevent lock-in and making things worse. But you can actually have your cake and eat it too by using all of these tools, understanding what you control and what the model provider is actually providing you, and making sure that you make the right decisions to prevent lock-in, but you unlock all of the great end user interfaces that these companies that are very well resourced are providing your users without having to own all the pixels. Because that's where we see a lot of risk, is if you feel like you need to own the pixels in order to prevent vendor lock-in, you don't understand how language models and agentic loops work.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think one of the most important sentences that you just said was that to be truly model agnostic and to truly avoid lock-in, you need to own your own context,
Yes.
right? And obviously based on like the resources that you have at your disposal, how technical you are as a person, your ability to own your context has like various levels of complexity, right? All the way to having a full-on engineering team managing your context in a very sophisticated way with things like memory stores and like memory management and context management systems. But I think that a lot of people don't realize that there is a lot that you can do in owning your context, even if you aren't a very technical person. Like I think plugin marketplaces are a really good example of that, in that if you have never coded in your entire life, literally just go to Claude and ask it how to build a plugin marketplace, and it will walk you through the steps. They're relatively simple and straightforward. And what you're effectively doing is just storing all of your skills. If you've got agents running in Claude Code, like those agents, you're just storing all of that in a folder that you could, in theory, drop into ChatGPT or drop into Perplexity and use in other places. And that's something that doesn't really require a lot of engineering resources, doesn't require a lot of engineering experience. Like it's a very simple way to own your context. You know, in the same way that you can go to ChatGPT and import your memory you can go to Claude and import your memory from ChatGPT. All it's really doing is just writing out all of the different things it knows about you and transferring it and pasting it into one system. I think the plugin marketplaces in simplest form are just that. And now that you can easily manage your context in one place, which is this one folder, and it automatically disseminates those changes across your Cowork, your Claude Code, your chat, your desktop app, I think that just becomes really powerful at the enterprise level for sure, but even at the personal level.
100%. And one of the important parts of owning your own context is figuring out how you want to assemble all the data needed in order to solve the workflows you're working on. And a common challenge that we always have is working with sell-side broker research. And we've had a ton of back and forth on how we go about solving that. There's been some big announcements over just the last week specifically on that.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be a whole conversation that we're going to get into. So let's take a quick break before we get into it. Something that I hear pretty consistently from executive leaders in the space is that they see value in AI, but there's no clear path to actually adopting it. Most providers, whether it's the frontier models like Claude and OpenAI, or the platforms being built on top of them, they hand you a product and they leave you to figure out whether it works for your workflows and how. And at Hedgeneer, we take a very different approach.
And we're able to because we have industry experience to not just understand investment process in the abstract, but to know how a fund actually operates, where information is sourced, how it moves through a team, what synthesis happens before a decision gets made. Once we understand that, we can build custom connectors in a data platform that connects all your data directly into Claude or OpenAI. Bloomberg, your primes, your internal models, your internal research notes, whatever you're actually using.
And then we deploy our platform on top of that. Think of it as a command center that sits on top of your Claude or OpenAI account. You can see every agent at your disposal, both the personal ones that you've built for yourself, as well as the org-wide ones that are maintained by your company. You can ask them to do things on demand directly within the application, or you could schedule reoccurring tasks that have them running in the background and having them send you the results straight to you via Slack or email.
And we also track usage at the firm over time, so leadership can see where AI is working, where it isn't, and surface opportunities to go deeper.
And we run training sessions with your team on Claude, on the platform, and even how to prompt and build skills better. So the competency builds internally and it sticks over time.
So if you're interested in learning more about how we can help your fund become AI native, shoot us an email at info@hedgeneer.io. So one thing that we see all the time in all of our engagements, especially on the discretionary side, is that figuring out navigating broker research in the form of both models as well as written commentary is a common data and research workflow that funds are trying to figure out as it pertains to their AI deployment. There's a lot of different ways to kind of slice and dice and solve that. So there's been some interesting changes in the industry just over the last week alone around options of being able to solve that, but it's common. We see it every single engagement that we have. Like we have never had an engagement where that's not a question or something that we have to figure out early on, right?
Yeah, it's always a question, and I think the answer is always a lot longer than people expect. Like AI is starting to dominate the conversation in every strategy across every industry, but it's relatively easy to pull filings. It's relatively easy to pull consensus estimates. It's relatively easy to pull actuals. It's not easy to pull written content from the sell side brokers. It's not that easy to pull models themselves. And it's due to a lot of different regulatory reasons, partially due to the brokers that are overseeing that data themselves, and partially also due to the way that sell side research is structured within the larger business model of all of these brokers.
Yeah. And I think it's important to understand like how, if you're a prime broker or a research provider, you are monetizing research. Like most primes, like your GS or your Morgan Stanley, Bank of America, you don't make money by selling research. You make money by trade execution flow as a broker, as well as prime services. So oftentimes by providing leverage. And then you build a relationship with your clients that will get them to route more of their flow, rely you more on their prime services. And providing them great research is a mechanism to be able to improve that relationship. And because of that, the relationship component, more so than the actual research itself, is what is highly valued by the sell-side research provider. And when you start disintermediating that, like you just have Claude pull down that research without attributing that back to the research provider, that relationship that was the most valued component of the research by the sell side provider is gone. You don't necessarily have that attribution. You don't know who the provider of that research was. You don't know if that's, like, for example, Eric Sheridan from GS, who covers Google, or other analysts that everyone knows by name. You just know that Claude kind of came up with it. And so figuring out that attribution problem is a serious issue. But at the same time, the ability of Claude to amplify high quality tokens and get that high quality research into the workflows of a buy side investor has never been easier. So like the value proposition that you actually have as a high quality research provider is actually that much better. And so it's interesting to see, like, for sell side providers that don't monetize research versus those that do, the actual opportunity for AI is actually like well designed for research providers that inherently just sell their research versus firms that see research as a mechanism of relationship management to drive monetization via prime and trading workflows.
Yeah, because in the US, a lot of these brokers are not charging for research. The attribution, the credit that the LLM gives to a particular broker is as important as the content itself, right? Like if you were to buy a Delupa license, you don't need the LLM to come back to you and say, oh, I got this data from Delupa. Sometimes it'll say it, sometimes it doesn't, because LLMs are non-deterministic in a lot of ways. But that doesn't really matter to Delupa and their bottom line because you've already paid for their data. It doesn't really matter to them how you consume it or how you acknowledge the fact that it came from them. And that's how most data providers work. With sell-side research, it's so different because if the LLM doesn't respond with the right attribution, or even worst case, confuses different sources together and misattributes research to particular brokers, that creates a huge problem for them. And so what's interesting about this problem is that I think with a lot of data vendors that don't have MCP connectors, like Bloomberg, for example, or Visible Alpha, for example, or Infusion, for example, they're still encouraging their clients with technical teams or technical implementators like us to build their own MCP connectors, right? Like we build internal MCP connectors for our clients to connect to most of the data sources that aren't available via MCP. We can't do it with sell-side broker research in the same way because they're also safeguarding against the risk of people building their own MCP connectors as well. And so what's interesting is that this ecosystem is starting to evolve in a way where the sense of urgency that I think is starting to swirl in the market is getting higher and higher. I think the level of impatience, or at least I don't know if you feel this way, but I feel like people are growing more and more impatient with sell-side broker research not being available in their AI, especially as they're starting to piece together these very complex workflows, like putting together first look memos or earnings preview notes or the models themselves. They're like, there's this really big piece that's missing, and there's nothing that anyone can really do about it other than a small group of companies that are working on this problem. And one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about it this week is because just this week there were two very large announcements in this space, right? AlphaSense launched a SuperAnalyst, which is essentially a always-on analyst that can basically act like an AlphaSense user 24/7 and do things for you as an agent running in the background. And then Aiera came out with a new kind of MCP connector, or I think it's more than an MCP connector. It's like an offering to access sell-side broker research with AI in an AI native way, where they've gotten approval from a large number of these brokers to allow users to start accessing their data via MCP, which I think is huge.
Mm-hmm. And I think that there are ways that we do have ways to be able to have MCP servers before Aiera, when you could, like, there were some brokers that would enable teams to be able to go to internal API or FTP and pull that research down systematically.
You have to talk to each broker one by one.
Exactly.
You get explicit approval.
It wasn't a technology problem. It was an operational nightmare, and you needed to have really strong pull within that broker in order to get all of the necessary approvals so that a technology team could be able to ingest that research and then make it accessible over MCP. So essentially what Aiera is doing is they're doing all of that operational upfront workflow kind of for you and exposing that over MCP, which is not like the hard part. That's actually the easiest thing to do at that point. Figuring out the operational components is the hard part. It kind of reminds me of call sheet, where like a prediction market isn't hard. The operational regulatory framework of getting people on board, like that's hard. The technology is not. And so not to say that what Aiera is doing isn't like technologically interesting, but it's more of it's legally and contractually interesting more so than anything else.
Yeah.
But I do see like the level of frustration within our clientele and across the industry around AI is getting better. They're figuring this out, and they realize that there is a moat that brokers are not allowing them to cross as it pertains to their research, yet they do feel somewhat entitled to be able to consume this within AI, given the relationship that they do have with these counterparties. And so as that frustration starts going more towards a tipping point, I believe that you're only going to see more and more brokers that are starting to coalesce around something like Aiera, where they have a standard interface for AI that works with ChatGPT, Anthropic, Cursor, you name it, that has some element of attribution, some element of acknowledgement that you are entitled for this research by the broker that handle that operational component. And as you get like adoption, the same thing happened with Visible Alpha, where like at first when VA came out, only a subset of brokers were on Visible Alpha. As you had more of the industry adopting Visible Alpha for consensus, those buy-side investor or buy-side broker relations teams that had a lot of pull started going to their primes and saying like, hey guys, like we want you on VA. I still understand you guys are doing all this for this. You'll still be part of, if an organization has a broker vote, most of them do, you'll still be credited for it, but like you need to get on VA because that's where our analysts consume your data. If you're not on VA, our analysts can't get them in the internal systems. And so then there'll even be like some of the brokers that were like the last person standing out would at least allow some of their largest clients to be able to turn it on via VA. And you'll see ultimately, I assume like the same thing with Aiera, where even the largest sell-side providers that are most guarded will eventually allow their clients to turn it on, assuming that their clientele understand that, hey, this is still coming from us. With a small possibility, there is like a long tail scenario that like building an MCP server is not actually that hard. I mean, we've
done it so many times.
Yeah, I know. Like it's
so easy.
It's actually like
most people actually don't think that.
Well, that's the crazy thing.
Yeah.
One of the crazy arbitrages that exists with like people don't realize how easy some of this stuff is, and it's actually really easy once you do, and you're in this short window of time where you have this arb that you can monetize. But an MCP server is on the surface one of the most trivial pieces of technology that exists. It's like it's
a Python script of functions.
Yes, it is a high schooler like CS 101. Let's teach you how to do an MCP server. Like
I'm sure that's happening in like classrooms right now.
Python cook. Yeah, like your intro to CS right now, I guarantee you if it's a Python intro to CS and their professor has any focus on applied use cases, is teaching people how to create an MCP server with ChatGPT at like lesson 2 or 3.
I remember I had to build a compiler. Scrap that, build an MCP server. That actually means something.
Totally. And so like, there is the element of as like non-technical consumers that do have great content realize that an MCP server is actually very easy to do. JPM or some of your like larger research providers producing their own MCP server, this is how you get all of your research. We actually kind of just want to own this last mile. Isn't that difficult for them to do? And also not going to be too disruptive if you have most of your data providers on an aggregator like Aiera and you just have like 1 or 2 of your big names on a separate one. If they really wanted to do that, now, why would they want to do that? They might want to provide more offerings. Oh, but you can also see treasury through this. If you want to be able to route, probably not through route trades through this, but if you wanted to get more like understanding of what your leverage is, if you wanted to have a little bit more around like information on like who your primary sales contacts are, like you could expose all of that data over a single MCP server that a prime could include, and then on top of that include research. And so if you wanted to have some more of like an AI driven relationship manager and they wanted to keep that relationship but in a more AI native framework, it may make sense for them to hold down a little bit and then build that. But that means you got to really be leaning into like, what is your AI offering for your clientele, which I think is like, that's also way too early in terms of the majority of their customers. But it's going to be interesting to see like, when do you conform and how long do you hold out for? And what are you really holding out for at the end of the day?
I do agree with your point that we're basically just redoing what happened in like the VA-esque scenario where we're just waiting for the tipping point where it makes a lot more sense for these brokers to get on board with something than it does for them to hold out. Right now, we haven't reached that tipping point yet. But at the same time, I also do think that there is IP in the ontology that these businesses are building outside of these brokers, right? Like in theory, you can pull consensus numbers for each broker and build a very simple Python script to average them out. But it makes so much more sense to go to someone like VA. And so in a similar way, if you are using LLMs to compile research, having the ability to take a name and actually see all the different conversations that happened around that name across all of these brokers is, I think, really powerful. I think it would be more powerful to have something like that than it would to have a JP, GS, B of A, UBS connector turn all of them on and have the LLM try to map that ontology itself. Like, that's just burning tokens at a certain point, right?
Yeah. I mean, but the ontology component of broker research is an interesting concept, because what is the ontology? Like, do you refer to like management guidance? Do you look for upcoming M&A? Is it on top line? Do you have supply chain? So like the ontology of broker research, especially when we're not just talking about like an earnings preview or like an earnings recap, but things that are more catalyst driven, the ontology can be very dynamic. So having somebody, and that's to some extent what AlphaSense tries to do. They try to think about like the ontology of the research
component.
component.
Aiera does the same thing.
Yeah. I think there's an other. I'm personally a big fan of like the way that VA thinks about ontology, where they tie everything to a KPI because it's inherently KPI driven. Both like there's company specific and standard models. That the relationship between VA and broker research over MCP is starting to get like pretty unlocked, where you could say like, hey, like you could go to VA, and we have like some awesome MCP servers now on VA. Eventually they're gonna, I'm sure, come out with their own. But in the interim, taking Visible Alpha, Snowflake data share, you turn it on, you have a very simple MCP server. It understands the data model that the VA tables consist of. You have a skill on top of it. Allow your Claude Code session to be able to query all those different tables and do dynamic joins. But then couple that and use the VA ontology and couple that with an Aiera or an AlphaSense. You're now able to say like, all right, like show me all of the apparel retail companies and what their same store sales. It's stupid. It's not like that hard to do, but like give me their same store sales estimates and earnings revisions over the last 12 quarters for FY1. So like we're going to go back over the last 3 years and see how they revise their forward-looking 12-month same-store sales guidance. So that kind of accounts a little bit of seasonality. And you can see that by a join across 4 or 5 different tables within Visible Alpha for everything within apparel retail. Like it would normally take an analyst, I don't know, several hours to come up with that. You natural language prompt that within Claude. But then let's couple that onto sell-side research, where you can also use AI to go and identify what were analysts talking about at those point in times associated to same-store sales within apparel for each company. And it then allows you to be able to associate narrative around revisions and explain the why behind the what. And that's something that by leveraging the VA ontology with the access to broker research that you can get from, like, for example, Aiera, or if you have your own like broker research environment internally, allows you to be able to understand why these revisions happen. And you also are able to like have this concept of same store sales in the ontology for broker research and apparel. But what's also really cool, going on to like what you can do by leveraging the VA ontology within broker research, VA has another thing, like they have their key metrics, KPIs, which are going to be non-GAAP company specific KPIs that they've done at this point, like is like best in class, like as good as it gets when it comes to identifying what are like the primary KPIs that are driving each company. That if you're deep in the weeds, like you're a bias analyst, this is what you're really focusing. You're not looking at EPS. I mean, you still are going to look at EPS or EPS diluted, but you're really looking at these 4 or 5 KPIs that are actually driving the fundamentals of the company. and it's difficult at scale to figure those out. VA's already done that for you. And so just use those key KPIs that you can query now over MCP. You don't even need to know how to do it. You just tell Claude that you use the key KPIs in VA, or you just have that defined in a skill. So you didn't even ask Claude. It just inherently knows that's where you go to find what's the topics, the themes that really matter for this company. And then use that with access to the MCP of the broker research to identify how the sell side analyst or the covering analyst is discussing specifically over these themes, and you've been able to use that ontology and precede it to understand like what's happening there over time. And then you could use a lot of different ways to be able to start structuring that. And like that is an interesting way where you start piecing together these kind of previously dispersed data sets that in isolation is valuable and interesting, but in the aggregate creates this mosaic that historically, like that's what I maybe used to do in a prior job. And I usually had to have dozens of engineers working on different problems, and sometimes domain experts that are understanding like this complex ontology within VA, ingesting it into a data model, figuring out how we want to tag and use natural language on all this sell-side broker research. They had to strong arm them into making available to you. And you have like maybe everything in Cosmos or Elasticsearch or other these like large document stores, and then figuring out how you want to tag these company-specific KPIs that maybe before VA, you had to rely on parsing your analyst models at scale to do that. Now, we do that in an afternoon. And you then put it into this amazing visualizer. If you want to say like, hey, like show me what are the 5 most important KPIs, how their sell side has revised them over time, charted against beta adjusted returns of that name, and then point to each major deviation and what was the actual reason for that, cite and justify that within a high quality sell side research model. And you're then able to understand the evolution of these names in a way that honestly, you had to have so many engineers to be able to build something like that 5 years ago. And a product manager that had so much damn context around all of this, and then like a way to feed teams of analysts of understanding these models in detail in a structured way into one system that I don't even like. I'm looking back on what we used to be able to do, and I don't even think you can do more now with that with one AI engineer that is worth their salt and an analyst that understands what's going on in a week, and getting all of that infrastructure set up. And a couple of these data vendors are making a lot of these things just now available to you. Like VA's got great, at least fundamental ontology. It's not what they sell you, but that's what I think is really cool. They also have great consensus estimates, but like it's the ontology that I think is really cool, at least from a fundamental perspective. And then these AI data model data providers like Aiera at AlphaSense are doing the operational strong arming, or at least incentive navigating to get these brokers comfortable with systematically making their research available to AI. And then you have these incredible foundational models like GPT, Opus, the ability to do the inference of bridging those things together. And you suddenly get like this incredibly deep insight into these names that are far beyond anything any technology system was doing just like a year ago, but like far beyond like most analysts' ability to be able to dissect and understand what's going on in a name very quickly. And the engineering of that is actually not that hard. Like we do that as a business. Like for some organization, nothing's easy, really. Everything in life is kind of hard. Like when we say something's easy, it's harder than it actually is. But in reality, like there's hard problems to solve. What I'm talking about right now is building the AI infrastructure for that. That's not a hard problem to solve. You just have to have people that know how to do it, or a system that does it for you. But on the aggregate, the ease in which all of that is just now available, just from the last 6 months, it's amazing. It's incredible. And so you can see why some of these banks and research providers are a little uncomfortable making all of this available to Claude and or OpenAI, because they're suddenly disintermediated and all this value is suddenly accruing so quickly that it's just so much change and so fast in a business model that's not even built around monetizing token consumption. Because if you're just paying for tokens, or you're paying for, when I say data license, when I say paying for tokens, I mean licensing data, but I just refer to it as you pay for tokens now, because I believe everything go through inference. If it's not going through AI inference right now, it will be within the next several months. So like if you're subscribing to data, you're paying for tokens. And so if you're selling data, you're selling tokens. You're not selling data, because ultimately that data gets converted to tokens. That's a prerequisite for inference time. So if you're in the business of selling tokens, I mean, it's not a bad business model. You monetize the tokens and people pay what the value of those tokens are providing them. And if you're providing great tokens, which can be the form of like great data from Bloomberg, it's great tokens. They got to get some good tokens. If you're talking about great sell-side analysis of upcoming drugs in an early stage drug trial, and maybe you're even like also like an oncology researcher for Mayo Clinic, those are some damn valuable tokens. If you're somebody that really understands the fundamentals of the name and you're providing great insight, those are great tokens. People will pay good money for great tokens. But if you're not even in the business model of monetizing your tokens, this whole thing doesn't work. And that is where, getting back to your original question, the most amount of friction is happening right now and frustration from the buy side of why can't I get these broker models in my AI workflows?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly why they're frustrated, right? Like they're using AI and they're able to merge all of these various data sources together in a way that they never could as easily as they can. And now they're like, okay, imagine if I had I can pull all of my internal notes. I can pull all of my emails. I can pull all of my Slack messages. I can pull all of the filings from Sec Edgar. And I'm able to get this really rich tapestry of what's going on, both within my firm and outside it. And imagine what I could do if I had all the broker research that I lean so heavily on. But I think another thing that you brought up a little bit earlier on in your kind of
my rant,
in your eloquent monologue, was the value of being able to join data sources together, right, with an LLM. And I think what's really what I kind of see with the AlphaSense, the Aiera, and a lot of other people in this game that are doing something similar is that when you look at these two announcements that happened this week, the connectivity between these offerings or these tokens, as you're saying it, is vastly different as a function of the way that they're going about building this business, right? With AlphaSense, yes, you get access to more brokers and inherently then get access to more research, but this analyst, the SuperAnalyst, only runs within the four walls of AlphaSense.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have this analyst pulling in data from VA. You can't have this analyst pulling in data from your SharePoint. You can't have this analyst pulling in data from Bloomberg. With Aiera, it's a little bit different because they are, like you mentioned, going to these brokers and fighting the good fight on all of our behalf. But as a function of that, the number of brokers on that platform is just lower. And it's obviously going to go up. But right now, in this moment, it's lower. And so buy-side institutions are now having to make the choice of, do I want the ease of being able to connect this data to all of the other MCP connectors that I have, the skill ecosystem that I have, the agent system that I have? Or do I live with the fact that I need to run in AlphaSense in isolation, get all of the information I need, and then manually port it over to something else to synthesize it with everything else that I have in my data ecosystem, and in exchange get more research as a function of it? And so like it's a shitty choice for people to have to pick between right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's just where we are.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good analogy. I like to think of it in a token supply chain, and understanding where you are in that supply chain is critical to make sure that you're able to sustain value, not get overly disrupted. And I think both of those vendors, like an Aiera or an AlphaSense, are in the business of selling tokens. Like their job is to sell high quality tokens. The higher the quality, the better. So even though you'll have agents that run within AlphaSense, those are still producing tokens that are being sold and consumed by a customer, a buy-side client, to be able to put then into inference. In order to all right, how do we want to take all this research, put it into inference, come up with what our official thesis is? And even though there's some agentic elements to that, it's still token consumption the same way with Aiera. And the challenge with being in a token selling business is that you're also competing with other vendors that are also trying to sell tokens. And so who else is selling tokens? Bloomberg. And so if you want Bloomberg data in AlphaSense, you have to realize that they're actually a competitor to you right now. And they're also in the same business model as you. So then if you're a client and you're like, oh, I want Bloomberg data and I want AlphaSense data, I'm totally fine Bloomberg making your data available in AlphaSense, or AlphaSense make your data available within Bloomberg. That would be great for me. Now, because both of them are in the token selling business and they're trying to sell as much tokens as possible and get as much value for that, when they allow somebody else to be a redistributor of that data, it starts eating into their margins, and they're very defensive of that. So because of that model, when I see both of those, most of these vendors are in the business of selling tokens, and even they don't have to be raw tokens from Edgar. They can be tokens that analysts read research from Edgar. They produce a research document that you then have an agent that goes and refines that and makes it even higher quality tokens. At the end of the day, they're still selling back tokens. They're going through a lot of refinement. It's not raw oil. It's processed. It's refined. It's high quality like jet fuel that they're selling, JP54, not just raw crude. But they're still selling tokens at the end of the day. And it's up to them, the client, to be responsible for the assembly of those tokens and the synthesis of it. And because these different vendors are all in the business of selling tokens, and they're competitive with each other, and they don't want to disintermediate themselves, the person that they're actually selling to, there's still an element of synthesis that happens on the client side, which is why you're going to continue to see Visible Alpha and AlphaSense both producing great tokens, but it's still going to have to be joined together on the client side at inference. And it's that realization of our entire business of why we are actually in the model of assembling tokens and helping our clients, making sure that when they're ultimately building tokens and combining them together with all of these different data vendors, what their users are prompting when they're including information from themselves into context based on what they're writing down or pulling in their notes. And there's predefined skills or memory stores or knowledge bases that are also available within that agentic loop, that the combination of tokens that are being built there and then sent off to the language models, whether it's ChatGPT or Anthropic with Claude, are the best combination of tokens at all time. And you observe that. You identify how could we have made those tokens even better. You then go and add new data, update the data, train a user, allow them to prompt a little bit better, improve the system context, the memory store, or the knowledge base of the organization, so that the next time the company needs to go through the process of assembling tokens and passing that off for inference, that tokens are actually getting better over time, that you don't make the same mistake twice.
But one could argue that AlphaSense and Bloomberg are redistributors. Like, that is why it's so difficult for them to open their data outside of their walls, right? Like, Bloomberg has to deal with all of the exchanges that they're sourcing their data from and all of the regulatory constraints that prevent them from building an MCP server tomorrow and just getting all proprietary exchange data available on there. Like, there's a reason why you can't use the server API within your firm and expose exchange level data to people that don't have a Bloomberg Anywhere terminal. Like, it's all licensing. Same thing with AlphaSense. Like, I don't think that...
I guess that, to your point, there already are redistributors.
Yeah.
Like Bloomberg, yeah, exactly. So Bloomberg already is a redistributor. They don't want to redistribute through another redistributor.
And like every single one of these data vendors that we've mentioned over the past like 20 minutes, we've probably mentioned 5 or 6 of them. every single one of them are ones that we've worked with before. Every single one of them have really strong working relationship with us. And I think a big reason for that is all of them recognize that vendors and assemblers like us can do the one thing that they cannot do, which is allow their clients to connect their data to other sources. Like, I don't think that Bloomberg or AlphaSense or Aiera or Visible Alpha, like none of them would disagree with the fundamental value of being able to use all of their data in one place to do a task the same way that a fundamental research analyst would on their own, right? The end goal for everyone involved is building agents that can operate autonomously with the context that human analysts do today. And so I think that they're all aware of the fact that they can't build a system that connects their data to everyone else because they're in a lot of ways constrained by the data vendors that they are redistributing.
Mm-hmm.
And then we are the people that can help build together those blocks and deliver something to our mutual clients that just starts exponentially increasing the value of that data license in the first place.
Exactly. And we never license data as a redistributor third-party partner. Data is always licensed between our clients and their data providers. We're just plumbers running in their environment, connecting all of their data to AI with also their AI licenses. So if they're using Cursor or they're using ChatGPT Enterprise or they're using Claude Enterprise, those licenses, that inference is, again, running on their license. That's their relationship. And so by not forcing ourselves to be a third-party redistributor in anything that we do and not having a SaaS multi-tenant model where our clients have to ship their data to us, we instead ship our software and our people to them. It allows us to be able to it allows us to be able to add value to our clients where they desperately need it. And it allows us to do that in a way where these data providers are not threatened. We actually oftentimes are enabling them to sell to a customer base a product that is a Snowflake data share or that is an MCP server or that is an API interface that this clientele previously didn't have anyone in-house that could know how to do any of that. So by us providing this service to our clients, we also inherently are providing this service to a lot of these data providers that we're enabling them to sell to a new client base, but also like add more value than they could with because they just didn't have anybody in house that could do some of this.
Yeah. And I think in a lot of ways, like this advantage, this is one thing that we do in a lot of other things. So take this with a grain of salt, but like this value add that plumbers have right now is not unique to hedge funds. I'm sure it's happening across all industry verticals because all industries consume different data vendors in different ways. But I feel like this is a short-term advantage. I think that the way that we think about data licensing and data redistribution is going to transform as a function of AI. It just hasn't yet, right? Like this system doesn't work. Like if there's one thing to take out of this entire conversation is like the way that we think about data and data redistribution and data in the form of tokens and how it gets passed through in inference. Like we have not built a paradigm of data licensing that works with AI well.
Totally.
You know? And so now we're just like the people that are like, hey, we'll take all of your licenses. We'll put everything together within your environment in a way that's compliant with all of your data licenses. But like the data licenses themselves are broken.
Yeah. So with that, another awesome episode, Jhanvi. Love talking about broker research with you.
Yeah, same here.
And so for everyone, thanks for tuning in. Again, I'm your host, Michael Watson. This is our co-host,
Jhanvi.
And tune into us on Spotify, iTunes. We're on YouTube, Instagram, and all the other major social media platforms. So until next episode, take it easy.
The Hedge Engineer podcast releases episodes weekly on Tuesday. Our hosts are Michael Watson and Jhanvi. The Hedge Engineer podcast is produced and edited by Aaron Free. Follow us on your social platform of choice and reach out to us at podcast@hedgeengineer.io.